Hello, it's Keith here again. I'm going to be doing some more testing on the Spectrum Plus 3 today. I did find some bugs the other day, but also I was rather disappointed in the video quality of the recording I took. There were some colour problems. It didn't quite look as good as it does on the real Spectrum, but more importantly there was some stuttering, and sometimes you would see the character judder on the screen. That wasn't actually the gameplay, that was the camera itself. I was using a digital SLR, and obviously that camera really can't do the job that I was trying to make it do. It doesn't seem to be able to record full HD without some stuttering artifacts, at least on the SD card I was using. So today I'm using a proper video camera, and we're going to be recording again, and I'm going to play the first two levels again, and I'll be talking through some new stuff today so that hopefully you can learn a bit about the game and maybe you'll be interested in it. So let's make a start. Firstly, I'm going to redefine my controls. Now you can set the keys to any key on the keyboard or on the Kempson joystick if you have one. I don't have one on this machine, so I won't be able to use it. So I'm just going to set the keys. Now we have up, down, left and right. And then three fire buttons: fire left, fire right, smart bomb. And then we have a pause button. And then we have the second player controls. Now even if you don't want to play as the second player, you do have to define some controls. So I'm just going to pick some random ones. You can hear now it's saving it to the disk. So you only have to set them once. And now we're ready to start the game. Now I should point out the game does require 128K. It won't work on 48K systems. That's because things like the loading screens are quite big, but the gameplay itself, the main levels do use multiple banks of sprites, and there's just simply no memory on the 48K system to allow for that. So I'm afraid you do need a 128K system on the Spectrum to play it. Hoping that the result is sufficiently pleasant that the 48K users doing without will be worth it, because as I say, I've put quite a lot of effort into making the graphics as good as I can, and things like the last level have a pre-compiled sprite background which uses up about it's about 4K on its own just for that background, and then there's all kinds of other tricks along the way that again are using up quite a lot of memory. So now one thing I kind of tried to point out last time, but maybe I didn't make it fully clear, you are actually playing the same game from the point of view of the levels. The sprites all appear at the same positions, the sprites movement is the same, the bullet patterns are the same, and that's because the level data, the data that defines the objects on the levels, is identical, and it's only the parts of the game engine that are relating to screen drawing that differ between the systems. Now one quite curious thing about the Spectrum and the MSX versions is the Amstrad CPCs are 320 pixel wide screen, whereas the ZX Spectrum and MSX are 256 pixel wide, so there is actually a slightly smaller viewing area. But one sort of secret thing is you can actually hear them before they appear on the screen, and you can shoot them because they are already in the game area. If you know where they're going to be, you can shoot them before they arrive on the screen, and that will allow you to sort of dispatch them more quickly. You can see during the gameplay you can collect up the two pentagram drones that will allow you to fire from multiple points. So you can see I've got two now. That is the limit of the game. That was actually a limit based on the sprite abilities of the CPC Plus originally. The system would only allow me enough sprites to have two drones with two players, and that's also the reason, quite interestingly, that in two-player mode you can't have 3 drones or 4 drones between the two players. There's only a maximum of 2 drones per level, and those have to be divided by whichever player collected them. Now the power-up method is slightly unusual possibly. You lose your power-ups after every main level. So this is the boss battle, so I still have my power-ups, but on the start of the next level you will lose them again. I didn't want the game to be like games that I find frustrating like R-Type, where as soon as you die you lose everything you've got, and that makes the game harder than if you were doing well. It always seemed quite backwards for me to punish the player for doing badly when the bad players would probably need help to complete the game at all. I was always much more fond of Xenon 2, where you actually kept the power-ups for the entire game. Now that wasn't realistic in this game because I simply couldn't program enough power-ups to make that logical. So I thought of the alternative of resetting the power-ups every main level. This is now level 2, we're starting the forest level, and that gives a good trade-off, I feel, between the incentive and the sense of boosting the powers, of gaining the power-ups and keeping them, but then going back to 0 every level, so that even if you missed some last time, you're not being permanently punished. But I thought that was a good trade-off. That said, as the game progresses, you will realise that really, if you need to do anything you can to get those power-ups, because the game, if you try and do the last level with no power-ups, you'll just go through dozens and dozens of continues, because it's so the enemies all take many hits, and it's just really not realistic. So you want to sort of, if you've got smart bombs denoted by the scrolls in the bottom left, you should use them to clear away the enemies to get to those power-ups. And if you haven't got any, you're probably going to have to just run through the bullet fire and risk taking a hit rather than miss those power-ups, because they are essential as the game goes on. Now you'll notice the player's bullets are very small compared to the enemy ones. That is another Spectrum only feature, and that's simply again because the player's bullets aren't particularly important from the point of view of survival. You always know roughly where you're shooting, whereas avoiding the enemy bullets is very essential. So I wanted to make sure there was no real chance of misunderstanding that and misinterpreting one of your own bullets as the enemies, which if they all look the same would definitely be the case on the Spectrum. On the other systems they're different colours, you see, so that's not really going to happen. Now on all systems you'll notice we've got a bit of a background here. It's kind of an interlaced background, and that's simply to reduce the amount of processing power drawing the background takes, because in this game a lot of the CPU power is being used by drawing the bullets, and beyond that just drawing the enemy sprites, and the player sprites and things are using power as well, quite a lot. So really the backgrounds are just icing on the cake. They don't do anything, so I wanted to make them visually appealing but didn't really want to use too many resources in the process, so that's why they're quite basic. So here we've got our sort of big spoof boss approaching message, which was a bit of a parody of the Japanese shooters. Blazing Star has some ridiculous ones, but I think they actually might be parody as well. So I'd say, oh, I've accidentally pressed the start button for the second player. That's why that other character's come in and is about to die. So by default you actually share continues. You saw at the top the number of continues was shown. Whoever dies they will deplete, but there is an alternate mode where you have your own continue stock. Each player has their own continue stock, and the idea of that was that it was supposed to be a more competitive mode where it was in your incentive to kill, to steal the power-ups from the other player and leave them with nothing, so they'd die sooner and you'd be able to keep the power-ups. I don't know if anyone's ever actually played it in that mode, but that was specifically what it was called. It was called brood reduction mode, which is a biological term for species killing off their siblings. But I thought it would be quite funny to put that in here, because the players are supposed to be siblings, and it was a bit of a rivalry thing I wanted to put in there. In case you're wondering, the characters running across the bottom and the shoes at the top are a South Park joke. You might, if you know South Park, and you can probably guess what Zombie 2 is parodying, that's why they're in there. They were taken from that. Okay, so that's the end of the second level. I'm not going to show you any more here because I want you to wait to see the full game. So normally here what we'd do is we'd swap the disc and we'd move to the next level, but that's all you'll be seeing today. Thanks for watching and goodbye.